The heat of the late afternoon sun settled over the quiet suburb like a golden veil. I remember standing at the threshold of our house, waving goodbye to my husband, Ferris, as he climbed into the family van with his brothers, sisters, and mother. They were heading to the airport, all dressed in white, all smiles, bound for the sacred lands of Makkah and Medina for Umrah. He kissed my forehead gently and whispered, "Pray for me, Habibti." His eyes held that familiar sincerity I had trusted for 8 years of marriage. Little did I know, behind that tenderness lay an ocean of secrets. The days that followed were filled with photos in the family group chat, Ferris standing before the Kaaba, Ferris in the courtyard of Masjid Nabawi, smiling beside his mother with dates and Zamzam water. I felt proud, envious even, that I hadn't joined. But he had insisted this trip be for his mother, a family moment, he said, after her recovery from surgery. But on the 6th night, a strange silence crept in. The usual flood of photos stopped. Ferris wasn't responding to my texts as quickly. I told myself it was probably just the exhaustion of worship, the late prayers, the crowds. Until his sister, Amal, posted a photo in her Instagram story that made my breath hitch. In it, she was standing beside a girl I didn't recognize. A beautiful young woman in an elegant white abaya, holding a bouquet of white roses, her hands adorned with henna. And Ferris was standing right next to her, smiling, wearing a bisht, a groom's robe. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity. My mind refused to process. My stomach turned. I clicked the story again and again, hoping it would somehow disappear, that I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was someone else? Maybe it was a cousin's wedding? But the more I looked, the more my denial crumbled. The comments beneath the story were the final blow. "Congratulations to the newlyweds. May Allah bless your marriage. Mashallah, Brother Ferris." My hands trembled. I messaged Amal immediately. "What is this? Is Ferris married? Is this real?" No reply. I messaged Ferris. "Ferris, what's going on? Who is that girl?" It took him an hour to respond. And when he did, it was a simple message. "We'll talk when I return. Please don't cause a scene." That was the moment something in me broke. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, sitting in the dark living room, replaying every conversation, every glance, every "I love you" that now felt scripted. I had loved him deeply. I had served his family, like my own. I had trusted him blindly. And he had married another woman in Makkah, the holiest of cities. While I sat at home, raising our 2 children, planning a surprise welcome party for his return. The next few days were a blur. Some family members tried to explain it away as something cultural, religiously permissible. "You're still the first wife," one aunt said over the phone. "This is not uncommon. Be patient. Allah will reward you." But I didn't want to be understood through someone else's logic. I wanted the truth. When Ferris finally returned, he entered the house like a stranger. He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Instead, he looked cautious, measured. He sat across from me and began his speech like a man giving a presentation. I didn't plan for it to happen. It was something my mother arranged. Her friend's daughter. She's young, from a good family. "You know how my mother has always wanted me to marry again." I said nothing. He continued, "I didn't tell you, because I knew you wouldn't agree. But Islam permits it. And I made sure everything was done properly. She will not interfere in your life or the children's." He said it all with the calm of a man who thought his argument was watertight, who believed his logic was infallible. That's when I finally spoke. "You went to the house of God to build a lie." He flinched. For a moment, his confidence cracked. "You looked into my eyes before you left," I said, my voice shaking, "and told me to pray for you." "I did. Every night, while you were there building a new life with someone else." He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. That same hand had signed a marriage contract with another woman just days ago. "You broke my heart in the holiest city on earth," I whispered. He tried to explain again, to paint the decision as something noble, something spiritual. But all I heard was betrayal wrapped in religious justifications. I stood up and walked away, but not before looking him straight in the eye and saying, "You didn't just marry someone else, Ferris. You killed the trust one built for 8 years with my own hands." And I knew then nothing would ever be the same again. He didn't follow me as I walked upstairs. The silence between us hung heavy like the air before a storm. I shut the bedroom door behind me, not to keep him out, but to keep my own rage in. The walls had seen me cry before, but not like this. This time, it wasn't sorrow. It was humiliation. Betrayal. The realization that I had been played like a side character in the story of my own marriage. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the prayer mat folded at the corner. How many nights had I knelt there, praying for his safety, his guidance, his happiness? How many tears had soaked that very fabric while he was miles away, not lost in prayer, but lost in someone else's eyes? What kind of man does that? And worse, what kind of woman stands beside him as he does? My phone buzzed again. It was a message from Amal, finally. "I'm sorry you had to find out like that. It wasn't meant to hurt you. It just happened so fast." That was supposed to make it better? The same sister-in-law who had called me her role model, who had sat with me for hours complaining about men who cheat, she now defended her brother's deception as something that just happened. The betrayal didn't come from one direction. It had come from all sides. His mother, who had kissed my forehead at our wedding, who used to praise my cooking and thank me for taking care of her son, had now arranged another marriage behind my back. Not once did she think to speak to me, to ask how I might feel. I was invisible in their plans. A name on a family tree, not a human being with a heart that could bleed. But I didn't cry that night. I packed a small bag instead. Not because I was leaving for good, but because I needed to reclaim a part of myself that I had lost in the shadows of that man's decisions. I left the house just before dawn. The world was still asleep, as if the earth itself hadn't yet woken up to the injustice I had just endured. I drove aimlessly at first. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move.
To breathe.
To feel the wind and the silence away from the suffocating walls of a house that no longer felt like home. Eventually, I ended up at a small seaside town we used to visit early in our marriage. Before the kids. Before the complications. Back when he used to laugh with his whole face, and I used to believe his laughter was real. I walked barefoot on the sand, letting the waves wash over my ankles, as though the sea could cleanse the betrayal clinging to my skin. I remembered our first trip there. He had carried me on his back when my sandals broke. We'd laughed so hard that people stared. He had promised then, "As long as I'm alive, I'll never hurt you." I wish he hadn't said that. Some promises are better left unspoken. Hours passed before I checked my phone again. Missed calls. Voice notes. His voice was calm but panicked. "Please come back home. The kids are asking for you. We need to talk. I know you're hurting, but don't let Shaitan make things worse." That last line hit me like a slap. Shaitan? Suddenly my pain was evil? My reaction was a temptation? Men like Ferris had mastered the art of spiritual manipulation, wrapping betrayal in verses, covering deceit in religious cloth. He forgot that Allah sees hearts, not just signatures on paper. He forgot that a second marriage done through injustice is not a sunnah, it's a sin. I returned home after 3 days. Not because he asked me to. Not because I had forgiven him. But because I still had 2 children who needed their mother. I walked in to find him in the living room, the Quran open on his lap, as though piety could erase what had been done. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, voice rough. "I handled it the wrong way. I should have told you. I just didn't know how." "Then you shouldn't have done it," I replied simply. He nodded, but I saw the disappointment in his expression, as though he expected a more emotional outburst, as though my quiet was harder to handle than any shouting could be. I had changed, and he knew it. For weeks after, we lived in a fragile, fractured rhythm. He tried to resume normalcy. He took the kids to school, bought me gifts I didn't open, cooked breakfast like he used to when we were first married. But I saw it all for what it was, a performance. Guilt wrapped in routine. I didn't ask about her. I didn't want to know her name. I didn't care where she lived or what she looked like. The damage had already been done. Knowing more would only salt the wound. One evening, while he was in the backyard with the kids, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It began simply, "Assalamu alaikum, sister. I'm sorry to disturb you. I just wanted to say something from one woman to another." My heart dropped. I stared at the message for a long time, hands trembling, heart racing with a strange mix of dread and curiosity. Then, slowly, I opened it. "Assalamu alaikum, sister. I'm sorry to disturb you. I just wanted to say something from one woman to another." I didn't know Ferris was married when I agreed to the Nikah. His mother told my family he was single. "It was only after the ceremony that I found out about you. I never wanted to be part of something so painful for another woman. If I had known, I would have walked away." My breath caught in my chest. I read the message again and again, trying to absorb every word. The second wife, this stranger, this ghost who had haunted my sleepless nights, was not my enemy.
She was a pawn, too.
Used by the same hands that had manipulated me. Her tone was genuine, almost shaken. And in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't about her. This wasn't even about the second marriage. This was about a man who believed he could break hearts under the banner of faith and never face the consequences. I didn't reply to her. Not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. My war was no longer with her. It was with the silence I had accepted for far too long. The silence that crept in when I felt uncomfortable but smiled anyway. The silence I swallowed when I served his family while they made plans that excluded me. The silence I justified in the name of patience, sabr, and love. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, really looked. Not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a woman. A woman who had sacrificed, endured, and forgiven more than she ever received in return. And I made a promise, quietly, with the strength only a broken heart can know. Never again will I let my loyalty to someone else come at the cost of betrayal to myself. I called Ferris into the room. He entered hesitantly, shoulders slouched, like a boy summoned by a headmistress. He had grown quieter over the weeks, uncertain of his place, unsure if I would ever truly forgive him. "I'm not going to scream," I said softly. "I'm not going to beg, or cry, or fight." He nodded, cautiously hopeful. "But I will say this, and I want you to remember it for the rest of your life." He met my eyes, and for once, he looked afraid. "You didn't just marry someone else. You rewrote the definition of our marriage without asking me if I wanted to live in that story. You used religion like a shield and hid behind your mother's wishes, but deep down, you knew it was wrong. You knew you were lying. Because if you truly believed it was right, you would have told me. You would have let me prepare my heart. But you wanted to take the easy way, cutting my trust while pretending to protect my feelings." He tried to speak, but I raised a hand.
"No."
"This is the part where you listen. Because I have spent years listening. To your dreams, your doubts, your stress, your family problems. Now you will listen to mine. I was never afraid of you marrying another woman. I was afraid of becoming invisible in a love I helped build. I was afraid that everything I gave you was not enough to make you stay honest with me." Silence stretched between us. He lowered his gaze. Not out of shame, but out of realization. He hadn't just failed as a husband. He had failed as a man who had been entrusted with someone's entire soul. I didn't ask for divorce that night.
Not yet.
I didn't make any rash declarations. Because sometimes, true power isn't in leaving. It's in knowing you can. And choosing when. In the days that followed, I rebuilt my world slowly, not around Ferris, not around his choices, but around me. I started studying again. I reconnected with old friends. I spent more time with my children, not just as their mother, but as a woman they could one day be proud of. I turned my pain into fuel and my heartbreak into a map back to myself. Ferris tried, in his way, to fix things. But he no longer controlled the narrative. I no longer waited for him to return from work like the center of my universe had entered the room. Now I was the center, and the gravity had shifted. I still wear my wedding ring, not as a symbol of loyalty to him, but as a reminder of the woman I was when I put it on. hopeful, trusting.
Brave.
That woman deserved to be honored, not erased by betrayal. The truth is, sometimes, the people we love the most are the ones who teach us how deeply we must love ourselves. And sometimes, it takes the holiest of places to uncover the most unholy truths.